So as you may or may not know, Path of Exile 2 has been getting some pretty heavy feedback on some problems with the endgame, people kind of being upset about like big nerfs happening and not being able to change their builds. Well, they've got a news post talking about some changes that they are planning on making. So we're gonna go through everything here. So one big gameplay change that they're doing is they are making it so that passive point respeccing will be cheaper at higher levels. So if you've been kind of struggling with, say, your build gets nerfed, you just simply don't have enough gold to be able to respec it, it says it should be 40 to 50% cheaper. I would have also liked to see them say something at least about, if a certain ascendancy or something gets massively changed, that they would be giving those people at least some way to change their character, because fundamentally I do still feel like some of the ascendancies are just kind of broken at the moment, and people having those issues, it really kind of sucks for them to have to essentially just make a whole new character anyways, but this is nice, so I'm happy to see this. Now, Trial of the Sekimas was definitely a weak point. I do think a ton of changes need to happen here. One big change that they are doing is that they are essentially just making it so that melee is a little bit easier. It's like a little bit more forgiving to be melee. So when you are closer to ranged enemies now, you'll take less honor damage, meaning melee in general is just going to be a bit tankier. They fixed like some bugs with damage over time doing triple damage. I didn't notice this, but that's crazy. I don't actually know what the skitter golems are, so this probably isn't that huge of a change. These serpents were actually quite annoying because they would block you when they were underground, and them being like underground and ambushing and all of that was really, really frustrating. And then the volcanoes created by Rattlecage's Fissure now last half the duration. This is the first boss on floor 1. I am a little surprised to not see any changes for floor 4. I'm just not sure if they haven't gotten there yet or they feel like people will eventually be able to do it. Floor 4 of the Trial of the Sekimas is just, I really feel like it's a little overtuned for what it should be, at least for the amount of defenses and the amount of health that the monsters have. That's just my take on it. I know there are like a ton of super overpowered builds that can do it, but normal builds, they're kind of struggling. I feel like this is maybe they need to nerf it a little bit, but they didn't. So now let's talk about in-game and monster balance. So this is something I had a pretty big problem with. Gearing was really super hard. Getting certain kinds of resistances was super hard. Chaos damage was super overwhelming. It seems like they've addressed most of that. So first off, maps no longer have additional elemental resistance penalties applied at tier 6 and tier 11. If you didn't know, because this wasn't something that a lot of people were aware of, as you get up into higher tier maps, meaning as you get into like yellows and red tier maps, there was additional elemental penalties that happened to your gear, which is kind of insane. It just says that it's now consistent across all of the end game. I don't know what this actually means, if it's gotten worse or better, but make sure that when you go into game after they put this patch through, that you check your resistances. They've also, thank goodness, made it so that chaos damage scales less aggressively. This was a huge problem. If you weren't aware, I have, I don't know, let me actually check here. So my character has 38 chaos res because it's just really super hard to get chaos res at the moment. My character has 38 chaos res. White bone archer mobs that do chaos damage were one-shotting me with like 40 chaos res and like 2,000 plus life. Getting one shot by white bone archer mobs. Chaos damage was a problem, but hopefully this gets addressed now. I didn't notice the critical strike problem. I hadn't really ran a lot of maps with crit damage bonus, so maybe this is where some of those weird spikes of damage were coming from, so this is good. I do kind of agree that breach encounters would get very spicy very quickly, especially at the higher tier maps. I could handle it most of the time, but there were a few cases where it really just started just ramping to an insane amount of enemies, so this is probably a good change. Even though it's less dense and meaning you're going to get less drops, it was a little crazy. I'm super glad to see the volatile crystal modifiers is gone. It was kind of frustrating in general, but I mean, it was deal withable, but it was still pretty like difficult to see it sometimes, especially on maps that had like lots of stuff and lots of foliage on the ground. And then the purple explosives created from volatile plants dealing less damage is also really good, because these were super hard to see, and I'm pretty sure it was chaos damage. Most of this is chaos damage that they're nerfing. It was just very, very out of line. I did not notice the flash charge drain thing, but The fact that it's draining 10 times less is kind of insane. That obviously must have been very busted. So I'm super happy to see this. This is a big step in the right direction for Endgame. I do still feel like maybe there's a little bit of issues with the ramping from like tier 1 maps all the way into tier 15 maps. However, chaos damage not one-shotting you instantly, and hopefully this means that elemental resistances will be a little bit easier to come across, because that is definitely a big problem, getting all of your resistances in game. This should make things quite a bit better. Super happy to see this. So they're making it so that charm modifiers are more common on belts. This was something that confused me a lot, because if you don't know, like when I was in game, I'm level 88 right now, and I've looked at a lot of belts. I've tried to make a lot of better belts. I still have one charm, and I've never seen the modifier that gives you additional ones. Someone in my Discord linked one of them once, but I've never seen the modifier in a belt that gives you an additional charm slot. So it's cool, I guess, that we'll actually get to use multiple charms now, because it would be really nice to be able to have like a stun charm, a freeze charm, and maybe a shock charm or something like that. It would be super cool. There's a lot of really cool charms, and I've never been able to use them, so that's really solid. This is an interesting change. I'm assuming that Electrocute was maybe just a little bit too strong and people were stunning mobs a little bit too easily. However, the damage penalty being gone is a pretty good trade-off here, honestly. Like, I'm fine with more damage. However, for builds that relied on, you know, enemies being electrocuted, this might be a pretty sizable nerf. We're just gonna have to see. 25% harder isn't that crazy. However, to compensate for this, they have added a new lightning damage and electrocute cluster in between the ranger and the monk. So if you are a monk or you are a ranger that's doing lightning damage, you'll at least have something that'll let you get back to where you were, essentially. So this may overall just be like a slight buff, because you're gonna get some damage. So like the support gem's gonna get some damage if you were using the support gem and not the gloves. And then you're gonna get a new cluster, maybe, that'll do something for you. This is kind of worrying me a little bit, because it's saying it's now more difficult to chain freeze enemies by reducing the amount of freeze buildup applied after a freeze has been applied. This kind of is how my build works. And I don't feel like I was freezing things that insanely, like on bosses and such. This is kind of like the whole thing behind my build. So I may not even be able to put a build guide out now after seeing this, because this fundamentally potentially changes my build. I'll talk a little bit more about that in the skill support section, but if you're waiting for a build guide update for me, this like slightly terrifies me of putting out a build, so I might hold off. We'll see. I may just do an update video or something like that. I don't know where the Hunter's Talisman is. I guess we can find that. So Hunter's Talisman. It says it gives us +1 charm slot. Okay, so that's right here, Hunter's Talisman. It took me a minute to actually find this. 25% chance when a charm is used to use another charm without consuming charges. So they're putting in an additional +1 charm slot there. And the small passes leading up to it now grant the stat it formerly gave. So it's going to be, I'm assuming, 25% chance when a charm is used to use another charm. So that's going to be what these small points give. That's actually pretty big. I would definitely spend 2 points on another charm slot. So that's huge, actually. It's right by my build. So definitely something you should look at. This is probably a big buff if you're in that area of the tree, so make sure to look for this when the patch comes. So they do address here that they've had to nerf a few skills that were too overpowered, and they say it's basically a situation in which a certain skill is so powerful that players feel no other method of playing the game is viable. This is probably accurate. It's kind of something I said in my previous video that I think people got a little bit wrong, because I said you're kind of asking for, you know, your build to get nerfed if you're always chasing the most overpowered thing. And the reason I say that is because these skills are obviously not made correctly. Like, there's obvious problems with them, and we'll talk about some things that happen down here, like in particular the scaling gem levels on certain skills. Realistically, what I'm trying to say is that if you're always chasing things that are most likely broken or not intended, obviously there's the things that are going to get fixed, right? I personally think it's fine that those things get nerfed, but I also want them to make it significantly easier to change your build, which they're working towards, and it seems that they've done at the higher end. We'll see how those gold changes feel, but yeah, I mean, some builds where you're literally like one-shotting everything in the game, with this low level of gear that we have currently is probably not okay. And they are confirming that they're trying to not make these builds bad. They're just trying to make them like in line with everything else essentially. And that their goal here is that they don't want to do meta changing things except when they do like new large content patches, like they're doing massive changes. So going forward, once we're out of early access, they really are not going to do any giant meta shifting changes. And this is what they've done in Path of Exile 1 for a long time. They're really good about really only nerfing the egregious stuff. Like if you make a build in a league in Path of Exile, typically you feel safe on that build for the rest of the patch. I can count on like one hand the amount of time that they've done mid-league nerfs in PoE 1. Should be the same going forward here. So this is only really an early access thing. If it's something that really worried you or bothered you, don't need to worry too much. However, I am super excited to see that they are looking at underpowered skills and support gems, because I feel like there's a lot in particular that have some issues. So I know some people were complaining about like the rolling slam and shield skills and such, so it's cool that we're gonna get some more shield skills. I don't know too much about the generate frenzy charge bow skills. There's been a couple that people have liked, however those seemingly have gotten nerfed really hard. I know that a lot of people have said that like bone and chaos damage over time spells were really rough and really bad, so good to see that. I do feel like crossbows have a lot of weak spots, and I do feel like a lot of the later gems do have a ton of weak spots as well. Right now on my build, I am able to do tier 15s relatively comfortably, but when it starts getting into the higher tier bosses and such, a lot of these later skills just feel really weak. Like, I think there needs to be a bit more punch in some of them. There are obvious cases where like gas grenade and things like that are working fine, but things like, I don't know, like Siege Cascade and Plasma Blast, Hailstorm rounds, they need some love. Like there's definitely some stuff in here that needs some love, so I'm curious to see what they're looking to do. And also they've kind of just said this random, like, we're looking at support gems. We've added 2 new supports and removed or lessened the penalties on many others, notably the fire, lightning, and cold exposure supports. I'm curious what these many others are, because there's a lot of penalties, and it does feel to me in general like once you get to 4 support gems on a skill, you kind of struggle to find like your 5th link or your 6th link. It's pretty hard to find things that work for all of the skills in the game. So this is pretty cool. Hopefully we'll get to see some interesting stuff. They've added a Tremors support gem, which means that this is going to give multiple more aftershocks to skills with a damage penalty. If aftershocks are good, this will probably be pretty nice. They're adding a bidding support gem, more damage to the command skill of supported minions. So it seems like they're trying to make it so that the active damage of minions can be a little bit more played around instead of just like AFKing with minions, which is what a lot of people do. So it was kind of strange to me that the exposure support gems penalize damage so hard. Because if you look in support gems here, if we go and take a look at support gems and we look at the exposure ones, a lot of these have like huge downsides, like 25% less damage for something that just gives exposure. The problem here is, while I understand that they don't want it to be for free, there's a lot of skills that you can do that just give better exposure than this support gem. And it's like almost an instant cast, and then it lasts for like 10 seconds or something like that. So it's very strange that this nerfed it, because now you can kind of just add this on a support ability and have it be okay. Now, do be aware, for anybody that are playing these builds, you might want to gather a little bit of gold just in case if you are using any of these. Skeletal Arsonist Spirit cost now match the other 2 skeleton mages. I don't know how much of a build killer this is, because I'm not too super familiar with minions, but if it's going to be in line with the other 2 skeleton mages, double check and see how much of your damage that you're losing. This will probably still be fine, but it does look like it's a nerf to the amount of damage that minion build is doing. There is a very super powerful build going around with Vine Arrow right now, where you scale gem levels or something like that. Super like abuse case on gem levels and such. So as stated, they were never intended to be dealing this much damage themselves. So expect that this build was probably killed. I would highly suggest that you look to get out of this build as soon as you can. Get enough gold that you don't get stuck here soon. Also, for those of you playing party play, it looks like magnetic salvo is getting nerfed so that only your own lightning arrows work, so you can't have like one person spamming lightning arrows and one person spamming magnetic salvo. It looks like they didn't really nerf very much, so monk players seemingly like you are okay at the moment. They think that that amount of damage is fine. So yeah, basically just people abusing Tornado or Vine Arrow at super high levels, and Skeleton Arsonists and Party Play. So those are the 3 things that you probably want to be wary of if you're playing any of those builds at the moment. And it does look like this kind of will be the last patch for the holidays for a few weeks, so good to see that we're definitely getting some in-game changes before the holidays actually hits, because this is a big thing. This will make it significantly easier for people who are just now entering the endgame and maps to get a little bit further and not feel so desperate to survive to white random chaos archers that are one-shotting you from off screen. Those not being so punishing anymore is going to go a long way to endgame feeling better. I hope to see a little bit more as we go into the early parts of the new year, because there definitely is still some issues with in-game maps that I feel that haven't been addressed, but they're harder to fix problems. Good to see the basic stuff being covered though. And that's going to be it for the video. If there are huge differences when the actual patch notes comes out in comparison to the stuff that we've read here today, I'll make another video. But for the meantime, mostly good changes. Be aware of a couple of builds that are getting heavily nerfed or essentially deleted. You're going to want to gather gold for that now to be able to swap your character into something else if that's the plan. So get it done now, don't wait, because I mean this patch could come out as soon as like the day after, very likely. So I would go and get yourself some gold right now. So remember boys, if you like the video, give it a like, subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit that notification bell to stay up to date with all the latest videos, and I'll see you all later, the gamers.